Hi, my name's Lorelai. At my own engagement party, my sister gave away the house my parents gave me and said it was hers to give. She smiled, like it meant nothing. My father turned to me in front of everyone and asked, "Why are you still renting?" That's when I realized I'd spent my whole life being quiet, thinking silence would protect me. But silence cost me everything. And when the truth finally came out, her smile didn't just vanish, it shattered. Want to know what was inside that envelope he handed me? Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this, and where from? I want to know who's hearing this story, because I know I'm not the only one who's been betrayed by family. I arrived a little early, not wanting to draw attention, but somehow doing exactly that. The engagement party was already glowing, string lights laced through the garden canopy, soft jazz playing somewhere in the distance, and the faint, salty breeze rolling in from the San Diego coast. It should have felt magical. It didn't. I adjusted my dress at the waist and stood by the edge of the patio, watching guests laugh with glasses of champagne in hand. I could feel eyes skimming over me, smiles that didn't quite reach the heart. The bride-to-be, yet always the youngest daughter first, the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who didn't make waves. That night, I wasn't sure if I was the celebration or just the setting. My heels clicked lightly as I stepped toward the main seating area. A few familiar faces greeted me, old family friends, some neighbors from my father's gated community. "You look beautiful tonight, Lorelai." Mrs. Trenton from next door smiled politely before adding, "Darcy said you've always had such classic taste." I nodded, lips tight. That's how it always went. A compliment that circled back to Darcy, my older sister, the effortless star of every room, even when she wasn't trying. "You must be so proud," someone else chimed in. "Darcy told us you're renting these days. Such a smart move in this market. Not everyone needs to own." I felt my throat close for a beat. "She's always been practical," another guest chuckled, patting my shoulder like I was a child who'd just chosen carrots over candy. I smiled again, thinner this time, and glanced toward the back entrance of the house. I needed a breath, just a moment away from curated smiles and veiled barbs. Inside, the hallway was quiet, the noise from the patio muffled by walls lined with photos of family milestones. I stepped into the bathroom to adjust my dress. The mirror reflected someone who looked fine, not angry, not hurt, just stretched thin. As I turned to head back, I noticed her clutch on the hallway console, Darcy's. Of course, she could leave it anywhere and assume no one would touch it. But it wasn't the clutch that stopped me, it was the keychain hanging off the zipper. It was a simple thing, leather with a tarnished metal charm in the shape of a seahorse. But I knew it instantly. It used to say, "Lorelai's Beach" in small script, etched by hand. Now that engraving was scratched out, faded nearly blank. I hadn't seen that keychain in years. I reached for it before catching myself. My hand hovered. That beach villa had been mine, given to me by my father after I landed my first major contract. It wasn't a gift for Darcy. She had no reason to have that keychain. Why the hell did she? A knot tightened in my stomach. I stepped back, leaving the clutch untouched, and returned outside. The string lights had taken on a different hue now, more interrogation lamp than ambiance. My father stood at the head table, his champagne glass raised. He was in one of his rare jovial moods, already a drink in. His voice boomed over the crowd. "To my youngest daughter," he said, and everyone turned toward me. My chest tightened. I nodded politely, frozen in place. "You've made us so proud," he continued. "But hey, kiddo, where's that beach villa we gave you a couple years back? You still renting these days?" The question hit like a slap in silk gloves. There was a pause, 1 second, 2, before I could even register what to say. I opened my mouth, but, "Oh, that?" Darcy's voice rang out, clear and casual as if we were talking about Lent Tupperware. "I gave it to my husband's family. They deserved it more." Laughter stopped. Glasses paused midair. Even the jazz seemed to hush. I turned to her. She was standing, a smug grace in her posture, smiling like she'd just donated a couch to charity. Not a multi-million-dollar piece of oceanfront property. No one said a word, not at first. I could feel every eye pivoting toward me, searching for my reaction. My father's mouth hung open slightly, the corners twitching, not with anger, but confusion. My fiancé's mother blinked twice, clearly calculating whether this was some kind of joke. I didn't say anything. My body felt numb, like someone had turned down the volume on my senses. I could still hear Darcy, still see the flicker of triumph in her eyes, but my own heartbeat had drowned out the rest. How could she say that? How could she decide that? She never earned that house. She never asked me. That wasn't hers to give. And yet, here we were, me, standing mute in front of all these people, while my sister wrapped a theft in a bow of generosity. I blinked slowly, realizing I was still holding my champagne glass. My grip loosened just in time to avoid a crack. How could she decide my life for me? I blinked, still gripping the untouched glass in my hand, and by the time my mind caught up to the moment, my father was already rising from his seat. He didn't speak right away. Marcellus Prescott had the kind of presence that didn't need volume. When he stood, conversations died down, not from command, but from confusion. His eyes darted between Darcy and me, a visible flicker of uncertainty tightening the corners of his mouth. The silence between us stretched far too long for comfort. "Darcy," he began, voice measured but low enough that even the glasses stopped clinking. "What do you mean you gave it to your husband's family?" It wasn't anger, not yet. It was disappointment wrapped in confusion, and somehow that was worse. I knew that tone. I'd grown up under it, shaped myself around it. My father never yelled. He didn't need to. Just the weight of his letdown could scrape your ribs from the inside. And standing there, I felt that weight start to fold over me, as if it wasn't just Darcy under his gaze. I was tangled in it too. My chest ached with the thought that maybe he didn't understand what was happening. Maybe he thought I'd agreed. Darcy, for her part, didn't miss a beat. She turned toward him like a pageant queen in full control of her narrative, hands folded just delicately enough at her waist. "Dad, come on," she said with a light laugh. "Lorelei's been swamped. She's barely even been out there in over a year. The taxes were piling up, maintenance issues. Do you remember the plumbing last spring?" Some people around us nodded, even though I was sure they had no idea what she was talking about. "She told me she was considering selling," Darcy continued. "But you know how complicated she's been with decisions lately. So, we just stepped in to help. It made more sense for it to go to someone who'd really use it. I thought you'd be relieved." I stared at her. That was her gift, saying something entirely untrue in a way that felt almost generous, like she was doing everyone a favor. I opened my mouth to speak, but her words had already begun shaping the atmosphere. The tension had shifted subtly, and I could feel it thickening in the air. "She's always had a lot on her plate," someone near the hors d'oeuvres table murmured. Another chimed in. "Darcy's so good at taking initiative, always has been." It was like watching a version of reality rebuild itself in real time, one that didn't include me. I took a step back, the weight of my heels sinking into the soft grass. The string lights above had grown too bright, too hot. My ears buzzed with a dull electric hum. From somewhere behind me, I heard my cousin's voice. "Wait, Lorelei," she called gently, as if trying to sound casual. "You really gave that place away?" It wasn't an accusation, it was curiosity, confusion, and that somehow made it feel worse. because now I wasn't just fighting Darcy's narrative, I was contending with the collective assumptions of every person in that garden. My reputation being rewritten in real time, sentence by sentence, behind backs and into wine glasses. I swallowed hard. My throat felt like sandpaper. "No," I finally said, voice low but clear. "That's not what happened." But even as I spoke, I could hear the edge of doubt in my own tone, and that was all they needed. That second of hesitation, that sliver of confusion, it folded perfectly into Darcy's version. I looked at my father. His brow was furrowed, unsure, not convinced, not yet. Darcy turned to the crowd with a practiced smile, like she was wrapping things up neatly with a bow. "I didn't mean to cause drama," she said. "I just figured Lorelai's always been generous. She probably would have said yes if she had the time to really think it through. I just expedited what was already in motion." Expedited? Was that what we were calling theft now? Before I could say a word, Winston emerged from the side patio and joined Darcy, slipping his hand around her back like a campaign photo op. He had the look of a man who made spreadsheets for sport, calm, calculated, dangerous in a way that didn't raise alarms until too late. "My family needed stability," he said matter-of-factly, his tone disarmingly warm. "We stepped in where it made sense." And just like that, the narrative was sealed. I felt something tilt inside me. Not anger, yet. Just a rising awareness that I was being erased, piece by piece, while still standing there in full view. Winston nodded once toward my father, then to me, like it was all a gentle correction. Like I was the one being irrational by having a reaction at all. "That villa would have sat empty," he added. "Now it's filled with life, family. Isn't that what matters most?" The crowd, unsure how to react, leaned into the easiest emotion available: approval, nods, hums of agreement, a few claps. And I couldn't breathe. I turned slightly, scanning the faces. None of them looked cruel, but none of them looked at me. Not really. They looked through me, toward the story they preferred, because Darcy's version was simpler. It spared them the discomfort of wondering if a golden daughter had done something awful. It kept the mood light. They've built an entire story without me, I thought, my fingers tightening against my palm. And just like that, the flicker of shame began to shift. It burned hotter now, less like humiliation and more like heat rising through ice. The first spark of something sharp and clear. Anger. "I'd like to understand why my daughter didn't know about this decision," my father said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It just landed, right there in the center of the garden, cracking the air open like a fault line. The hush that followed was absolute. Not a chair creaked, not a fork moved. The string lights above us swayed gently in the breeze, casting shifting patterns on the stunned faces around the tables. All those eyes that had been quietly judging me now flicked toward Darcy. I stood still, not blinking, not breathing. My father wasn't looking at me anymore. His focus had turned squarely on my sister, his posture sharp, expectant. But I still felt the weight of his words, the disbelief tucked into each syllable. There was no anger in his tone, but the undercurrent of disappointment was impossible to miss. It should have felt like relief that someone was finally questioning what had just happened, but it didn't. My hands were cold, and my stomach churned like I was 10 years old again and had just forgotten my lines in the school play. Darcy responded before anyone else could fill the silence. "Oh, Dad, it's not that serious," she said with a light laugh, waving a hand like she was dismissing a silly rumor. She stepped forward, deliberately, I noticed, putting herself physically between me and our father, like she was shielding me, or maybe shielding the truth. "It all just got kind of complicated," she said, her smile easy, voice breezy. Lorelai's been so overwhelmed lately with work and the engagement and everything. She's barely been to the villa in over a year. You know how she gets hyper-focused and forgetful. I thought I was helping. That forgetful landed like a slap. I felt the sting crawl up my neck. Darcy knew exactly how to layer words that sounded innocent to everyone else, but carried tiny blades meant just for me. She always had. And watching her now, cool, poised, performing for the crowd, I finally saw it clearly. This wasn't the first time she'd rewritten a story. It was just the first time I'd realized she was doing it to me. Then, like a crack in a windshield spreading suddenly across the glass, a memory surfaced. The day I'd closed on the villa, 3 summers ago. I had invited Darcy over that night, proud and nervous. I'd even made her favorite lemon cake. I remember standing barefoot in the new kitchen, watching the sunlight pour through the back doors, waiting for her to walk in. She arrived late, barely looked around, made a comment about the place being a little too isolated for her taste. Back then, I'd chalked it up to stress, a bad day. I told myself she was just tired, but standing here now, that memory took on a whole new shape. She hadn't been tired. She'd been jealous. That strained smile, the tightness around her eyes. It wasn't indifference, it was envy. She had seen something she wanted, and instead of celebrating with me, she'd started planning how to take it. Lorelai wasn't using the property, Winston said from just behind Darcy. His voice was soft but deliberate, polished like always. He took a small step forward, slipping his hand into the pocket of his tailored blazer. We assumed she was stepping away from it. We stepped in where it made sense for the family. No one wanted to let it sit and rot. His words didn't sting the same way Darcy's did. His tone was cooler, strategic, but they carried just as much damage. I felt the shift in the crowd again. A few nods, a couple of exchanged glances. It was working, the story was working, and I was drowning inside it. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words tangled somewhere between my ribs. I didn't even know what I'd say. Anything I said now would sound defensive, emotional, unstable. Exactly how they were framing me. Then, from near the bar, a voice rose that didn't match the rest. "I'm sorry, but I remember something a little different." We all turned. It was Mrs. Halverson, one of my mother's old friends. A woman with snow-white hair, perfect posture, and a reputation for remembering everything. "I ran into Darcy and her in-laws at that villa last October," she said, setting her wineglass gently on the table. "They were walking through it like it was already theirs, touring the place. I just assumed it was hers by then." The air snapped like a live wire. I looked at Darcy. For the first time tonight, she froze. It wasn't long, barely a second, but it was enough. She blinked fast, then plastered on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, that day," she said quickly. "That was just a walkthrough. Winston's parents were in town, and I wanted to show them the property before making decisions. Lorelai wasn't around, and I thought..." But no one was really listening anymore, because now the lie had a crack, and I saw it ripple across the faces around me, guests shifting in their chairs, glancing at one another with new discomfort. My breath finally came back to me, shaky, shallow. That one moment, that tiny interruption, meant everything. It wasn't full redemption, but it was a thread, and I grabbed it with both hands. Inside, something began to settle. Not peace, not yet, but clarity. She'd planned this, long before tonight. This wasn't impulsive or emotional. It was designed, quietly built over months, maybe longer. A whole narrative carved out behind my back, brick by brick, until the truth couldn't breathe. And the worst part? I had given her the benefit of the doubt, again and again, but no more. I stared at my sister as she adjusted her dress and refilled her champagne as if none of this mattered, and I whispered, so softly, I don't think even I heard it fully. So she planned this long before tonight. My father turned toward me before I could even gather a full breath, his expression carved with something I couldn't read. And then came the question that felt like it reached straight inside my ribs and pulled. Lorelei, did you agree to any of this? The words struck so cleanly that the air seemed to thin around me. I stood still, frozen, the soft hum of conversation fading until everything sounded muffled, like I was underwater. All I could hear clearly was my heartbeat pounding behind my ears. Every guest near us leaned in without moving. No one shifted, no one whispered. They were waiting, watching, judging. The weight of their attention pressed against my shoulders like wet sand. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. My father's trust had always meant more to me than anything, more than my job, more than my engagement, more even than the house I was suddenly losing. And here I was, struggling to answer him in a room full of people, ready to believe whatever made the least mess. I didn't know she gave it away, I finally managed, trying to keep my voice steady. But it trembled anyway, the sound so thin it barely carried past the floral centerpieces on the tables. My father's brow tightened, not in anger, but in something much heavier, a kind of sorrowful confusion that made my stomach twist. He wasn't disappointed in me. He was disappointed that all of this was happening, that something he gave in love had turned into a spectacle. I hated that this was unfolding in public. I hated how exposed I felt, like someone had taken my private life and held it up for the whole neighborhood to dissect. I wasn't even halfway through my next sentence when Darcy's voice cut across mine, sharp and bright. "Dad, she's exaggerating," she said loudly, laughing as if the whole situation was an overblown misunderstanding. "She knew she wasn't using it. We talked about this. She just forgets things when she's overwhelmed." There it was again, that soft dig, wrapped in sugary concern. The same trick she'd used since we were little, turning my silence into incompetence, turning her actions into favors. Some guests nodded. Of course they did. Darcy's confidence was crisp, smooth, familiar. She spoke like someone who never doubted the world would bend to her version of events. My stomach dropped. A cousin stepped forward slightly and asked, "So, you really just let it go?" Another whispered to his wife, "Maybe she wasn't keeping up with it. Those places take work." Their comments floated around me like fog, seeping into the cracks in my confidence. I tried to respond, but my own doubts started chewing at the edges of my thoughts. What if they were right? What if my quiet nature made me look careless? What if my hesitation tonight made it seem like I had been asleep at the wheel? Then a voice I rarely heard in any family gathering chimed in. Eleanor, my fiancé's mother, she was always polite, always measured, always composed in a way that made you want to avoid disappointing her. She lifted her glass slightly, her tone calm, but edged with a suggestion that felt heavier than the words themselves. "A villa is a serious asset," she said. "It concerns us all if it's handled carelessly." Handled carelessly. The phrase struck with the precision of a needle, soft, sharp, deep. I felt something twist deep in my chest at the idea that my worth as a partner, as a grown woman, was being weighed publicly. My credibility was shrinking by the second, and no matter how desperately I tried to catch hold of the moment, it kept slipping away. The garden lights blurred for a second. I blinked hard, grounding myself. The room had gone still again, waiting for my explanation, waiting for me to fight for my own truth. But the words wouldn't move. They were trapped somewhere inside me, stuck behind years of stepping aside, years of letting Darcy take up the space I was too polite to claim. And in that stretch of silence, those long, awful seconds, I realized something that made my throat tighten. I had spent years letting her write the story. She knew the rhythm of my pauses, the soft tone of my voice, the way I avoided confrontation. She counted on it. She always had. And I had given her the room to do it, again and again. The realization didn't bring relief. It brought a slow, aching numbness. The kind that spreads when you finally see the truth, but aren't ready to say it out loud. Inside, I whispered to myself, barely aware of how tight my hands had folded together. I'm losing my voice in a story that was never mine to begin with. And then my father did something he had never done before. He stepped toward Darcy, not me. Not protectively, not angrily, but with a weight in his eyes that hushed the entire room. You could feel the air shift, like something sacred was about to be disturbed. The kind of silence that demanded you not just listen, but witness. Darcy, he said, voice low but clear. We need to talk about the truth here. She blinked, just once. But that blink said everything. Her shoulders, once effortlessly high, dropped an inch. For the first time tonight, Darcy didn't have a script. Dad, come on, she said with a forced laugh, looking around as if the crowd could back her up. You're blowing this out of proportion. But her tone cracked at the edges. She looked at Winston, who had stepped half a pace behind her, like he wasn't sure whether to stay close or disappear. He offered a tight, unreadable smile, but said nothing. I stood still, my breath shallow, unsure whether I was more afraid of the truth coming out or relieved it finally might. My father's gaze didn't shift. The villa, he said, was never yours to give. He looked around, pausing before continuing. It was bought in Lorelei's name. She paid for it. I only matched her down payment as a gift to celebrate her first investment. A ripple moved through the room like a slow breeze turning into a gust. I heard someone gasp. Cutlery clicked as someone dropped a fork. The background jazz no longer masked the energy. It sharpened it. Darcy froze. Winston stiffened next to her. My heart pounded. I didn't know he had done that. I thought I had scraped every cent together on my own for that place. That he had quietly matched me to make me feel proud, to support me but not overshadow me, meant more than I could take in at that moment. And I found out like this, in front of everyone. I looked down at my feet, then back up, because I had to see it. I had to see her face. Darcy looked like she'd swallowed something sharp. Her mouth moved like she was searching for a word that wouldn't betray her. The charm was cracking. The guests shifted, glancing at each other. A few turned toward me with widened eyes. One of my cousins, who had asked if I'd just let the villa go, gave me an awkward, regretful glance. Eleanor, my fiancé's mother, looked like she wanted to fade into the wall. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired of being surprised by my own story. Darcy opened her mouth again. She told me she didn't want it anymore, she said, her voice louder now, as if volume could rebuild what had just fallen apart. She said it reminded her of stress. She wanted to let it go. And just like that, the lie slid from her lips as if it had always lived there. My father's face hardened, not in rage, but something deeper, like disappointment mixed with understanding, like this was no longer about a villa. Winston shifted, uncomfortably, but didn't move. He just looked at Darcy the way someone watches a fire burn too close to the curtains, but doesn't reach for water yet. Inside me, something buckled, not from pain, but from pressure. For years, I'd let her twist the narrative. For years, I'd told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But this time she had put my truth on display and tried to paint over it with her own brush. I straightened. I never said that, I said. Not once. My voice didn't tremble. People turned. It was so quiet that even the soft clink of a glass from the far end of the table felt sharp. Darcy's eyes darted toward me, momentarily startled, as if I'd grown taller or louder, or simply there in a way I hadn't been before. But I wasn't finished. I never told you I didn't want it. I never said it reminded me of stress. I loved that place. I worked for it. I built a life there. The words came from a place in me I hadn't touched in a long time. A part of me that remembered the smell of the ocean through that villa window, the sound of the old wood floors under my bare feet, the small meals I cooked alone while imagining how my life could grow in that space. Darcy opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, I felt taller than her. The room was still watching, still absorbing. But I wasn't frozen anymore. Inside, something finally stirred. A voice I hadn't heard clearly in years. I have to fight for the truth, or she'll keep taking pieces of my life. Darcy's expression tightened into something I hadn't seen before. Hard, cold, stripped of her usual charm. She took a single step closer, lowering her voice just enough to make sure only I could hear, while still letting the tension ripple through anyone close enough to sense it. "You really want to do this here?" she asked. It wasn't a question, it was a warning. For a second, I froze, not because I didn't expect it, but because it still startled me every time she dropped the act. That voice was the one I remembered from late-night fights over the phone, or whispered jabs during holidays when no one else was paying attention. The voice she saved just for me. People nearby pretended to sip their drinks, to check their watches, but I could feel their ears stretch toward us like they were tuning into a frequency they weren't supposed to catch. My throat tightened, but I didn't look away. Not this time. Then she leaned in, a little closer, her smile returning but without warmth. "If you keep this up," she said softly, "I'll tell them what you did last year." My heart kicked hard in my chest. What? What was she talking about? I blinked, trying to search my memory. Had I made a mistake? Something she could spin? Darcy never bluffed without ammo. And Winston? He gave the smallest nod behind her, just enough to let me know he was in on whatever lie this was. My breath came in shallow. "You don't know what I mean," she added, still smiling. "Oh, you will." Before I could even get a word out, she turned toward the guests, voice raised just enough to float across the room. "You know," she said, "everyone should probably hear the truth. I mean, since she's so concerned about honesty tonight." I felt my stomach drop. Darcy's voice turned light, casual, just loud enough. "Lorelai almost cost our parents everything last year," she said with a shrug. "That little investment opportunity she chased nearly wiped them out. It felt like someone had slapped me. No, that's not what happened." A few people gasped softly. Marcellus's jaw clenched. Evelyn looked like someone had just poured cold water down her back. I could feel the ripple moving through the room like a crack across glass. People shifted, whispering. A couple near the fireplace exchanged confused glances. My cousin Dana, always looking for gossip, leaned forward slightly, eyes wide. But the worst part wasn't their reactions. It was that she was lying. That investment wasn't reckless. It was mine. And it saved my parents from a tax crisis they hadn't even told me about until it was nearly too late. I'd taken a risk, yes, but I'd done it quietly, carefully, and for them. And now she was rewriting it, turning it into a weapon right here in front of everyone. She's rewriting history again, I thought. My hands trembled, so I tucked them behind my back, trying to steady myself. I remembered every time. I bit my tongue to keep the peace. Every time I told myself not to make waves. And now those silences were being filled with lies I never gave permission to breathe. Winston stepped forward. "Honestly," he said, his voice calm like a news anchor's, "Darcy has protected you more than you realize, Lorelai. We've kept a lot of things private, for your sake." A low murmur passed through the guests again. Someone muttered, "That's generous of them." Another, closer to my age, shifted uncomfortably. Marcellus began to speak, but I lifted my hand slightly, just enough to stop him. He hesitated, then stepped back. He understood. I needed to do this myself. I took a slow breath and looked Darcy in the eyes. "You didn't protect me," I said, quiet but clear. "You used me." Her eyes narrowed. "Here we go again," she said, exasperated. "The martyr routine." It was the exact phrase she used the last time I stood up to her. The same tone, too, like my truth was an inconvenience to her performance. But this time, something in the room shifted. My fiancé's mother, Eleanor, frowned. She looked from Darcy to me and back again. She was piecing it together, just like others were. One of my uncles coughed into his drink, muttering something under his breath that sounded like, "Too far." And Ohio, my fiancé, his eyes met mine. Not in pity, not in confusion, but like he was finally seeing what I'd been trying to explain in small fragments over the past year. I hadn't imagined any of this. My shame began to unravel, not because I'd been proven right, but because I no longer needed to prove anything. There was a small, strange click inside my chest, like something had aligned. I can't let them define me anymore. Not tonight. I stood a little taller, my voice steadier than it had been all evening. And just then, before another word could fall from anyone's lips, my father stepped between us, his shoulders squared, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. "Enough," he said. "Everyone needs to hear the truth now." He turned, looking straight at me first. Not with pity, not with hesitation, but with something that made my throat tighten. Belief. Then he shifted his gaze to Darcy. His voice didn't waver. "I'm done watching her take advantage of you." That room, once humming with side comments and subtle gasps, dropped into a silence so thick I could feel the pulse in my ears. A silence that changed shape, like the moment before a thunderstorm hits. Darcy didn't blink. Her smile, once charming and untouchable, turned rigid at the edges. Winston stiffened beside her like a man waiting for impact. For the first time in years, I felt my father standing on my side, and yet, even as relief crept into my chest, I knew this wasn't over. Not with Darcy, not yet. Darcy straightened, lifting her chin like she was stepping into a courtroom. "Oh, please," she said, "don't pretend you're some noble protector, Dad. You've been playing favorites since we were kids." There were gasps, soft but sharp, the kind that ripple when lines are crossed. She gestured toward me with a dramatic sigh. "Lorelai has played the victim her whole life. Everyone just eats it up because she's quiet and wounded-looking. But come on, let's not pretend she's innocent here." I wanted to flinch. I didn't. Instead, I watched her. And for the first time, I saw what lived underneath her performance. Desperation. And then my father did something none of us expected. He reached into his blazer and pulled out a folded document. Creases sharp, paper slightly worn. He laid it flat on the table between us. "This," he said, "is the original transaction record from the villa transfer." My pulse picked up. He looked at Darcy, his voice calm but cutting. "Lorelai never signed off. Her signature was forged." The silence was shattered by a collective inhale. A couple of guests leaned in. Someone dropped their glass. Darcy's face paled like blood had vanished from it. Winston froze, jaw clenched so tight, I thought it might crack. My knees nearly buckled. I hadn't known. He never told me. I turned to him, but his eyes stayed locked on Darcy. The truth wasn't just out. It was written in ink, on paper, in front of everyone. From the back of the room, someone whispered, "Forged. That's a felony." Another voice followed, "Is she serious?" The crowd had shifted. Moments ago, I was the problem child, the misunderstood sister. Now their gazes darted between Darcy and Winston with suspicion, with judgment. I felt a strange clarity sharpen inside me, years of self-doubt draining out through the soles of my shoes. And then Darcy's voice cracked. "Winston handled the paperwork," she blurted. "I didn't sign anything myself." The panic wasn't even disguised. Winston's head snapped toward her. "You told me she approved it," he said, his voice low but furious. Their performance shattered like thin glass. The couple who once presented themselves like a team, perfect, composed, was unraveling in real time. I watched the cracks run through them. "You said she didn't want it anymore," he added, his face red. "You told me you handled it." "And you didn't double-check?" she snapped back. "You're the one with the real estate license." They weren't speaking to me anymore, or the crowd. They were collapsing into each other's failures. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I let them twist and tangle themselves. I had learned something in all these years. Sometimes silence exposes more than shouting. Then I stepped forward. "I don't care which one of you filled out the paperwork," I said, my voice steady. "What I care about is that you both decided my life was something you could shuffle around like furniture." Everyone turned to face me, and I didn't shrink under it. "For years, I've let you rewrite my memories. You've taken credit for things you never did. You've twisted my silence into guilt, and I let you because it felt easier than fighting." Darcy said nothing. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "But I'm done letting you define me," I said. "I'm done playing small so you can look big." Eleanor looked at me, her expression shifting. Regret, maybe. A couple guests nodded softly. My cousin Paul muttered, "Finally." Darcy took a shaky breath. Her eyes darted around the room, realizing the tide had turned. "You don't know everything," she said suddenly, her voice quiet but pointed. "There's more. Things you don't understand." My stomach clenched. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached into her purse. Her fingers brushed against something inside, and when she pulled her hand back out, she held a small velvet pouch. My father's face went pale. So sudden, it was as if someone had flipped a switch and drained the color straight from him. Inside that velvet pouch was something I hadn't seen in over a decade. Something I thought had stayed buried with the past. My chest clenched as Darcy pulled it out slowly, like she was revealing some sacred relic. It was a key. Not just any key. I recognized it instantly. The small silver one, worn around the edges, etched with 2 initials in my grandmother's careful script, J.H. It had once belonged to her safe deposit box. The one she told me was, "For your eyes only, someday." That key had disappeared the day she died. I never even had a chance to ask about it. And now Darcy was holding it up like a trophy. "You think you're the victim?" she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Why don't you tell them what you've been hiding all these years in that box?" I stared at her, speechless. "What?" Darcy's voice sharpened. "Tell them how you kept documents from Mom and Dad, how you locked them away because you didn't want anyone to know what you'd done." The heat rushed to my face, not from guilt, but from the disbelief. She was spinning this so fast, the truth didn't stand a chance unless I held it steady. I managed to get out, "I don't know what you're talking about." Darcy smiled coldly. "Of course you don't." She reached back into the pouch, the crowd watching with the tension of an audience, waiting for a magician's final reveal. She pulled out a small stack of folded papers, edges yellowed just enough to look old, just enough to seem important. "These," she announced, laying them on the table beside the key, "were in the box." The entire room shifted toward her, breaths tightening. "Their financial records, letters, bank statements," she said. Things Lorelei didn't want anyone to see. My father stepped closer. His expression tightened, not in anger, but confusion. He was studying the papers, trying to make sense of what she was claiming. My mother didn't even move. Her eyes just locked on Darcy, like she was seeing a stranger. "I've never even opened that box," I said. "Grandma gave me the key, but I thought it was just sentimental. I never had the chance to ask her before she passed." Darcy scoffed. "Sure." But my words were shaking less now. The panic was morphing into something stronger, anger, and something deeper than anger, truth. I stepped forward, putting my hand flat on the table beside the papers. "I've never seen these in my life." Murmurs crept through the room. People craned their necks. It felt less like a party now, and more like a slow-motion trial. "She's lying," Darcy insisted, arms crossed. "She's always lied when it counted." Before I could answer, my father spoke. "I checked that box myself last month," he said quietly. It was empty. The room froze. Darcy didn't even blink. But Winston did. He turned sharply toward her. "What?" "I had to," she said quickly. "You don't understand. There were things she was hiding." "Darcy!" My mother's voice cracked for the first time all night. "What did you do?" There was no performance left in Darcy's face, only the bare bones of panic. "These papers didn't come from the box," my father said, reaching down to flip through them. "They're not even dated. Some are printed emails. They're meaningless." I could feel my breath again. Not relief, no. It wasn't over, but it was something close to air. I looked at Darcy then, really looked. Her arms had dropped. Her shoulders, always held high like a shield, were starting to slope. "You forged my signature," I said, voice calm. "You took the villa. You manipulated everyone in this room, and now you're fabricating evidence to protect yourself." Winston backed away from her, slowly. A man putting space between himself and a sinking ship. Darcy looked at me, eyes wet, but not from sadness. She was unraveling. It didn't make me feel better. It didn't make me feel victorious. Just tired. I kept going. "But the worst part," I said, "isn't the money. It's not the lies. It's that you had so many chances to just be my sister." I watched her face twitch like I'd slapped her. "You didn't have to compete with me. You didn't have to win. We could have just been family." She said nothing. Behind me, I heard someone whisper, "That's the truth right there." I turned to the crowd, not to plead, but to stand in it fully. "This ends tonight," I said quietly. Darcy wavered, knees bending slightly as if her body couldn't hold up the weight of the evening anymore. And then my father, still pale but steadier now, reached back into his jacket. This time, he pulled out something small and familiar. An envelope, deep cream paper, sealed with gold wax. He looked straight at me and said, "Lorelei, it's time you knew everything." The gold-sealed envelope in his hand looked small, almost delicate. But when he placed it in mine, it felt heavier than it should have, like it carried the weight of decades. Regret, love, maybe even guilt. I didn't open it right away. My fingers hesitated at the seal, and in the space between breaths, the room quieted again. Darcy stood a few feet away, pale and trembling. Winston had retreated to the corner near the bar, arms crossed, face unreadable. No one moved. I broke the seal carefully and slid the contents free. Inside was a deed, clean, crisp, brand new. My name stood alone at the top in bold lettering. No co-owners, no joint titles, just me, a beachfront villa, fully paid, tucked along the Carolina coast. I recognized the address. I'd passed it once, years ago, on a weekend trip, and admired the simple, open design. I never knew my father remembered. Beneath the deed was a small note, written in my father's handwriting, steadier than I expected. "For everything you carried quietly, You shouldn't have had to. My throat tightened. I swallowed hard to keep the tears from spilling. I didn't want to cry in front of all these people, not after everything. But when my father gently placed his hand on my shoulder, the dam cracked. I didn't sob. I just stood there, holding the papers, and let the moment settle. Darcy suddenly stepped forward. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're replacing me," she said. "You're choosing her." My father turned to face her fully. "I'm choosing honesty," he said, voice tired but steady. "Something you walked away from a long time ago." Darcy opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes darted to Winston, perhaps hoping he'd step in. But he didn't. His face was tight, embarrassed. "We're leaving," he muttered, already moving toward the door. Darcy didn't follow immediately. She lingered, caught in some invisible rope, between fury and sorrow. When she finally turned, it wasn't with defiance, it was with defeat. But I didn't cheer inside. I didn't feel proud watching her fall apart. I just felt done. She paused by the doorway, looking back one last time. That's when I spoke, my voice calm but strong. "This wasn't about taking anything from you. It was about finally stopping you from taking more from me." She froze, blinking back tears. "I won't chase your approval anymore," I continued, "and I won't hate you either." Her shoulders dropped a little. She nodded once, barely perceptible, and then walked out. Winston followed, his expression tight, his hand never reaching for hers. The door clicked shut behind them. For a long, quiet moment, no one said a word. Then Evelyn approached me, her steps tentative. "I should have said something sooner," she said. "I thought keeping quiet would keep the peace, but it didn't, did it?" "No," I replied softly. "It just kept the truth buried." She reached out and held my hands in hers. Her grip trembled. "I'm sorry, Lorelai," I nodded. "Thank you." Around us, guests began to murmur again, but the tone had shifted, softer, realer. A few offered gentle words. "We were wrong. I never knew. She fooled a lot of us." Most looked down, ashamed. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years came up and hugged me. "I always wondered," she whispered. "I just didn't want to believe it." Neither did I, for too long. The room started to clear as people trickled out. The noise softened. I stood alone for a moment and took a breath I hadn't felt safe enough to take in years. Eventually, I stepped outside to the terrace. The air was cool, the scent of salt water drifting on the wind. It hit my skin like a reset button. Behind me, soft footsteps. Ohio joined me, sliding his hand into mine. "You handled that with more strength than you realize," he said. I didn't answer right away. I was watching the tide roll in, soft waves cresting over each other like pages turning in a book I wasn't afraid to read anymore. Finally, I said, "It didn't feel like strength. It felt like survival." "Sometimes they're the same thing." I smiled a little. The lights inside the house glowed gently through the windows. Voices had quieted, and only the sound of the ocean filled the silence now. I turned back, took one last look at the home that had hosted 100 memories, and shattered just as many, and whispered to myself, I didn't win because they lost. I won because I finally chose me.